Okay, so I'm just going to make sure Casey gets here. No worries. I was like, did he go to the bathroom? Where does he go? Hello, everybody. Oh, now I'm there. Cool. All right, so we're about ready to get going with our next presentation. And this next presentation is actually going to be a dual presentation about design thinking. And the way this is going to work is that we're going to have two 20-minute presentations, and then we'll have 20 minutes for discussion. So we'll be expecting a lot of ideas to come out of this, and we'll be running around with the microphone. Maybe Nick will do it. He needs to get his steps in and stuff. So, yep. So our first presenter is Casey Kaplan. He is a principal user experience designer at the Nerdery with 11 years in industrial product design, 3D modeling, creative direction, and brand development. He is a design-minded generalist focused on driving impactful experiences by integrating human-centered design principles into business environments. So without any further ado, Casey.
Can everyone hear me okay? Excellent. All right, one more time. How's that? Great. Excellent. Let's get started then. Thanks, David. As you mentioned, my name is Casey Kaplan, and what I'm passionate about is meaningful design, impactful design, and doing design that's intentional, design that matters, and getting others to see the value in the effort that it takes to do good design. Fortunately, I'm supported by about 40 other user experience design professionals at the Nerdery, and we're a multidisciplinary team, backgrounds in industrial product design like myself, human factors and research. We have librarians, anthropologists, all sorts of different backgrounds. And that's one facet that really lends itself well to doing design thinking, being able to rely on one another when we're approaching problem spaces or value opportunities that are new to us. We rely heavily on others, one another, to bring different perspectives in those situations. And we believe good design aims to not only define the right problems, but also recognizes the value proposition. And that's part of what I'm talking about today, is value and how we can drive value through building empathy. So why design thinking today as we're talking about the innovation space? For me personally, it's a word that's grown. It's gotten a lot of buzz, and I think that's a healthy thing because it helps to position design with a capital D differently within organizations, and it helps to create a little bit more exposure to the benefits and the value of what design process does for people. And design is evolving. If we think about where design has been, 50 years ago to where it is at today, a lot has changed, and I'm going to get into that a little bit. Where I came from before I was at the Nerdery is a company called Product Through Innovation. So fitting for what we're talking about today, PTI for short. And if you haven't seen these around, these plush Easter baskets, this is one of the things that they were known for bringing to market. And I get a little slack from the people at the office now at the Nerdery for having designed Elmo Easter baskets. But that company did a lot of volume, and they introduced this type of a basket to the market before I started there, and sort of re-evolutionized that category and brought the price point from a $3.99, $4.99 traditional Easter basket to like a $14, $19.99 price point. And I found that really interesting. But I think about innovation differently today. It's not just about bringing something new and unique to the market, because what we find then is that those products eventually become commoditized, and price points drop down, and it's hard to find market differentiation as those things start to deteriorate, or if they even do stick around and stand the test of time. That's another challenge. So I think about innovation differently than I did back then. And as I mentioned, design being on a trajectory, I'll get into a little bit of where I see it today. So at the Nerdery, we love breaking into new territories. One is getting into this vacuum space, and this helped me to kind of think about and reflect on this evolution of design. Where were we at 50 years ago when design was heavily focused on aesthetics and even function? But the compact vacuum or Eames chair, a lot of people still view design as aesthetics and beauty, and that's certainly part of it. But it's not just about use anymore. Design kind of evolved into this problem-solving space. And I think that was partially due to the increase in technology or the complexity of systems and the need to make things easier for people. And there became more of a focus on people. And I think where design is headed today is to a place where we're focused more on value. And we're moving into a time where the things that we're designing are more interwoven and integrated into people's lives. And I think that we find value and meaning by understanding the people that we're designing for better. And I think that's where true innovation lies. And that's where design thinking can really help us to focus in and hone in on that central piece. Identify to be truly innovative and truly fit in the market and innovative. I think that we have to be filling needs in all three of these gaps. And the functional needs, the things that the product or the service that we're designing for have to do, those are pretty simple to identify. How it's actually done, that can get a little bit more complicated as we're trying to make things simple and easy to use. And the meaning, the needs that exist in that third bucket, the needs that aren't even visible on the surface level to the eye, they take a little bit more work to find. And this is where design thinking fits in. So today, I think this is one of our best tools that we have to designing innovative, simple, meaningful products, services, and whatnot. We can really apply this to anything. And what it boils down to is building empathy through understanding, through observations, and a discipline in prototyping, and a tolerance for failure. And I'm going to introduce kind of a framework to help us think about the steps that we go through, the steps that we use at the Nerdery to go through this type of a process. It may be a little different than what you've seen if you've done any research on design thinking, because I don't like the way it's typically laid out in a linear flow. This is a repeatable process as we are trying to build empathy or put ourselves in someone else's shoes, see things through their eyes, feel how they feel. This is going to be, it's an ongoing cyclical process. And this is a snapshot from back at our office. It's a hero's journey framework from Joseph Campbell, which I'm using kind of as a framework. And I won't get into the specifics of it, but I'll explain how I see it being fit into design thinking. On the x-axis across here, on the right side, we have analysis. And that helps us kind of like dissect the problems that we're solving for as we're trying to understand them, breaking them down into itty-bitty pieces, really understanding why. And on the other end of the spectrum, synthesis is where we're able to put things back together, reassemble them in different ways, and figure out how things ought to be in a way that serves needs better. On the vertical axis, at the top, we have concrete or everyday world. This is the way things are, the actual things that I can experience, solutions that I can go and test. And on the bottom, in the abstract world, we have more models where we can conceptualize things, we can put them into simple terms and try to play with them, a little bit more amorphous. And this is a space where design thinking lives. So the first thing we do is we go out and we watch people. We're not listening to what people do or listening to what they say. It's not about doing focus groups, it's watching for behaviors. And through that, we can build a closer empathy or understanding for why people do the things they do, more than just what they do. From there, we start to formulate patterns. As we're gathering a lot of data, we're dissecting things into pieces, and we're starting to understand patterns, and those are insights. We're helping us to frame where opportunities or problem spaces lie. And insights are just sweeping kind of generalizations, but statements of truth. As designers, we are framing these problems, we're finding patterns, and so they are telling us what? We make inferences based on those patterns that we're identifying. With those, we can start to diverge or start to ideate. And this is where design thinking really, this is one of the key components. Once we have framed problems through our observations, we move into a process of ideation, generating as many ideas as possible. And this is why multidisciplinary teams become really effective in that space, because I might bring something different to the table than someone who came from more of an engineering background. And we can have sort of play off of that and bounce ideas back and forth. And there's a lot of different exercises we can use in work sessions to kind of flush out some of the ideation. I heard game storming. We do a lot of those types of activities to flush that out. And then we make something. So it's a pretty easy, pretty simple type of a process. And from there, we make something, we test that, and we learn from that. So it sounds simple, and it breaks down into really two key components. We understand what the story exists like today, and then we figure out how to tell a new story, and then we test that and work with that. So I'm going to go through a few examples today of how we're applying this type of a process to the work that we do. So the first example exists in the special occasions place, where someone's planning for, say, Father's Day or a child's birthday. And as we started to explore in this space, we weren't really even clear what problems we were setting out to find. We just wanted to understand the space. So that's step one. We started to gain a broad understanding, comprehensive understanding of the entire process that someone goes through. And what you're seeing on the right there, or on your left, is a diary study that we had set up through Path. If you haven't heard of it, it's just an application which allowed us to create sort of a closed circuit network with the people that were participating in the study. And the great thing about this was it allowed us to start get that thing up and moving, and we let it run for about 4 or 5 weeks, while we could do some other things in tandem. So it didn't really give us an opportunity to get into the context of someone's home and observe. That would have been probably a little challenging to push through for 4 weeks. And really, how would we have stuck by someone's side for that long? So we had to come up with some alternate methods of ways we could kind of like frame the large landscape. So what that led to was sort of a broad mental model. The things that you're seeing, this is a feed coming from the diary study. That fed into the bottom, where we sort of mapped those out, and we had about 4 to 6 of them running at one time. And we sort of mapped those all out into the steps that someone goes through along the way. So in tandem with this, we were doing some in-lab observations of shopping that are just honing in on specific spots within this process, and then even interviews to gather a broader understanding of other areas. And through those conversations, we were talking with people. One woman in particular, she described how she was going out to get streamers and sort of use those to put in her son's doorway in her room, not even for the party, but so that when he woke up in the morning, he could walk through his streamers. And she had chocolate chip pancakes on the table for breakfast every year. And this was something that she had done once, and it really excited him when he woke up, and it was a special thing. And so she started to do that every year, and that became a thing that she did, and we thought that was really cool. She said, it's really important to have traditions and have things my son can look forward to and enjoy. Traditions, they'll be formed when we do things that we enjoy, and then when that happens, I plan to do them the following year. And this was a recurring pattern we started to see about traditions, and what that led to was an insight that in that second and third step of the design thinking process, that was tap into people's desire to create lasting traditions. People value starting new traditions and sometimes start them unintentionally. So this is interesting when working with a company who's trying to reinvent themselves and be modern in the space. The word tradition literally made people cringe. They didn't want to go that way. They had been stuck in their old ways of doing things for a long time, and that word was frowned upon. So we started to rethink about how we were talking about and framing traditions. Special events were actually broken down into minuscule pieces, and the little things that people were doing were actually of much value, and people were actually seeking them out in other places, for instance, Pinterest and Instagram, to try and figure out how they could craft and shape their own traditions. So what that led to then in the make something space was a strategy that carried those bits of content through into different channels for them, and we could start to paint clear pictures of how that thread would trace from the social space, where they were in a great position to talk about meaningful traditions, right through into the products that they were delivering to support those types of special traditions. From there, we took this strategy out and we tested it on people to see how effective it was, and they're continuing to use pieces of it in a lot of the content that they're creating. The second example I've got here is in the medical space, in the healthcare space. And we're working with a group of patients who suffered from bradycardia. And if you're not familiar, it's just a slow heartbeat. And we were on a really tight schedule. Again, not able to do a lot of ethnographic studies, but we were able to reach out to people who we knew, who knew people. And that's usually the case. Or we're reaching out to people through Craigslist or some other way to try and get things done quickly, and so that we can build that understanding. Fortunately, we're able to find some people. And this particular individual, call him Gary, was known through a relative of one of the colleagues on our team, and we were able to get to his place, and we also went to a couple other homes. And through the conversations with these people, some interesting things came out. He said, I haven't thought about the device. He had an implanted device for his bradycardia, and we were trying to understand what that was like to live with. What were some of the things he was going through, and so that we could tie in a lot of the features that the company wanted to build into the thing that we were looking to build. And we heard this. I haven't thought about the device since just after I got it. I've been walking, 30 minutes a day every morning with my wife and feeling great, basically. I haven't had any concerns. And we started to hear this over and over, and it was very interesting. And so one of the insights that came out was don't don't give people a reason to be concerned. Avoid using language that causes undue stress and worry, and only come off as urgent when necessary. And this didn't just come through in the content that we started to build into our application, but also through the colors we were choosing and the data visualization and things like that. What we understood there was that these people didn't need data. They were going about their lives just fine, not even thinking about their condition. And we were in a position where we could actually start introducing things to them that might lead to more concern. And so that's something that we had to really walk a fine line with of what was helpful and what wasn't. And how could we focus more on that health aspect that many of them were after versus the condition that we were asked to kind of enhance and solve. The business problem was very clear. On the user's side or on the patient's side, it was a little bit trickier. So with that, moving into step 4, where we're actually starting to build and prototype or make something, we started to put prototypes onto paper and put those in front of people. So in the study, we started to not so much test the usability of how this is a different individual, but how he could get through the process, but more about the language that we were using in the steps and how he might go about completing certain things or react to certain things. And so this type of paper prototyping helped us to validate or invalidate a lot of our ideas and iterate quickly. So from there, we refined our concepts. We refined into higher fidelity wireframes and even visual concepts, and since have gone through several cycles of testing and repeating that process. And the third example I wanted to share with you exists in kind of a customization space. So we do a lot of different types of web applications, mobile applications at the Nerdery and things like that. Some focused on customizing, personalizing, and this was an interesting space to spend some time investigating. So we started out by trying to find people who spent more time put more time into making something, not just taking something off the shelf and giving it to someone as is, but actually customizing it or personalizing it or going that extra step. And so we put out a screener, and with that we came up with people ranging from 55, Deloitte, 55, all the way down to 18. But a lot of them had these similar psychographic behaviors. They spent a lot of time on this stuff. For instance, she would put together these little gift bags, buy bags, and build these custom tags that she would put on them with little ribbons across them, and she would homemade cookies for people, and she would just go out of her way to spend lots of time making these things special. And it was very interesting, and I think one of the things that came out of this was she was saying, I've done something that they can't do, and it makes it extra special, and it was special for her. And so we went through this process of understanding how people were customizing, and we did some other in-lab usability testing on competitive applications to see how they were customizing using other things, since we didn't have an application yet to test. So what we did was we talked with people for about half hour to understand kind of their motivations, and as you can see, when we got to testing, some of them, it was so emotional for some of them to test that she was actually wiping tears away because this thing that she had customized and created was just so real to her. And that's tough to emulate that in a lab setting where we're actually pulling them out of the context of their home and having them customize and create something to try and get that real emotion. And so we did that by just asking questions. What were those motivations? So that first hour was just devoted to, okay, so for instance, we would ask, things like, when did you last take videos of your son? I just took a few yesterday, actually. Oh, really? Why was that? And so these real open-ended questions. Why were you taking videos of your son? Well, he started making these funny faces, and I just thought that that might be something my mom would like to see. Oh, that's interesting. We would say things like this. So I'm curious, why do you suppose she would like to see those? Well, she and I were just talking recently about these moments, and she told me that she wished she had the ability to kind of go back and view these from when I was young. And I just want my son to know how we were as a family when he gets older. You know, and so there was like this reason that she was actually going out to get this. And how that then manifested itself was in design ideas. We would take these insights, these patterns, and then with those statements, those insights, we would mash those up with technology patterns or patterns in their industry, and we'd start to just come up with these ideas, which were like, wow, these are, where did these even come from? We couldn't have come up with these kinds of ideas, but the fact that we had documented where our notes were coming from helped us to actually trace back the ideas to things that we actually heard and watched, behaviors that we had actually seen. So that's what I mean when I'm talking about meaningful innovation and real value there. Looks like we have a little error, but she said that one comment that I had mentioned earlier, I've done something that she can't do, and for that, she'll want to hold on to a long time, and she'll value that thing. And the insight there was people need to feel proud of the work that they've done, so praise them and reward them for their time. Give them satisfaction with even the small successes. And that then played through into a lot of the different interactions that we were doing, even if during onboarding, when they would move one thing out onto, say, a product, we could reward them for that and say, that's really a great job you're picking up really quickly, and give them little encouragement along the way. So that came through into a lot of different products and assets that we were creating, which we started to test and explore with people and iterate on and learn from and see how people use that. So I've been talking a lot about building empathy, but really what I'm talking about is finding value and reframing how we're thinking about design and incorporating design into our processes. Finding needs that address all three of those different aspects: use, usability, and meaning. And are we still going to design things that are aesthetically pleasing? Sure, that's what a lot of us love to do as designers. Are we still going to be solving problems? Absolutely. It's always going to be about problem solving as well, but really focusing on empathy and driving value is where I think design is headed. And let's use design thinking to allow us to do that better. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Casey. Appreciate that. So the next presenter is Virajita Singh, and she is Assistant Vice Provost in the Office of Equity and Diversity at the University of Minnesota, where she brings her expertise in design thinking, public interest design, and partnership studies to catalyze and support equity and diversity work of colleges and academic units across the university. She is also a senior research fellow and adjunct assistant professor in the College of Design, where she leads the Design for Community Resilience program that she founded at the Center for Sustainable Building Research, which provides sustainable design assistance to greater Minnesota communities. From 2011 to 2015, she began and led design thinking at College of Design at the University of Minnesota, a collaborative group that unleashes the creative potential of individuals and organizations across sectors to innovate in fulfilling their mission using the emerging field of design thinking. Her current academic work is focused on exploring the intersections of cultural transformation theory, partnership models, and design thinking as a strategy, particularly as it applies to higher education context. So please welcome Virajita Singh.
Very pleased to be here. Thanks for coming. And I'm glad Casey went before. It's really interesting to see his work, and we wouldn't have connected until this opportunity brought us together here. So I'm going to talk about design thinking in a different context, more sort of university, education, perhaps nonprofit, and also from the perspective of sort of systems change. And I'll start with a few influences. As Casey mentioned, if you've done design thinking research, there's a lot of sort of methods out there and processes. And there's some influential works. If you've read Change by Design by Tim Brown, it's about systems change and using design thinking in organizations. Another book that I often use with my students is Daniel Pink's A Whole New Mind. And it makes the argument that we are moving from an age of information, or information age as he calls it, to a conceptual age where it's not about gathering information. We have everything on our fingertips through Google and everything else. But it's really about making meaning and then creating things in response to that. And he talks about 6 aptitudes, of which design is one, empathy is another, story, and so on. So there are those aspects that he highlights. And then more closer to home, Tom Fisher is the former dean of the College of Design. He's now still in the College of Design leading the Metropolitan Design Center. And he's written for the last few decades about sort of the value of design and beyond sort of the world of products to how systems can be changed. And the quote here, in a world with little respect for traditional structures, almost everything from the operation of a company to the organization of a community can be approached as a design problem. So how do we sort of redesign with that kind of attitude is the question, and design thinking has value. A little bit about my current work in the College of Design. I focus on community resilience, and I put this slide up is that because this is sort of what got me interested. My background is actually in architecture, and that's what I was teaching, and then sustainable design. But as I worked with these communities, what became clear to me is that design, the kind of the process of thinking is really something that's relevant. And there's also a question of how people can use design then to inform their work, even if they're not trained in design themselves. So how do you get people to participate in the act of creating their environments and futures? So that's what brought me to design. So I'll talk a little bit about definition and principles, and Casey's covered it as well, so this is a repeat in some ways. But design thinking is an emerging field of practice rooted in the tools and processes traditionally employed in the design disciplines. And there's many. I haven't listed them all. There's many emerging ones, sort of web design, interactive design, user experience design. All of them use the design process, perhaps in sort of different ways, but many overlapping things within it. And so design thinking kind of gets at the core of that overlap. And there's aspects of it, problem definition, field research, idea generation, storyboarding, frequent prototyping. Again, we saw it in the last presentation. These are some of the characteristics of it. So what is design thinking then? A lot of design has focused on products. We see things of convenience, things of beauty, and so on. So design thinking is a process, but it's also a field. And it uses the tools and methods from design disciplines in a couple ways. One is that it's about creating something new, which I call sometimes leap. It's sort of leaping to the new design, or to refine and make better something that already exists. So that's the tweak. We had a conference on design at the College of Design called Tweak or Leap, and basically both those things are part of design. And inherently, I think the field of design seeks to create things that function well, that delight, that innovate, and that they create beauty. Casey also mentioned aesthetics, and sort of that is an underlying principle in all of design. So here I've represented the design thinking process following sort of the model that many of you may be familiar from IDEO and D-School's work over in Stanford. And so these 5 steps, empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test. This is kind of cut and dry. way of expressing it, but of course each of those processes have depth to it. I'm going to focus on just a couple here before I get into sort of examples. So empathy is really important. If you're going to design something well, you really need to take into account who you're designing for and what their feelings are and so on. And so users are really important, and putting yourself in the user's shoes. So if you were an architect, you would be really immersing yourself into the family that you're designing a house for and understand what their needs are, what their daily life is like, and so on, before you put pen to paper. So that's a really important part of the process. The second step, which I won't focus too much on, is the definition of the problem. And Casey talked about sort of getting deeper and deeper about why something is done a certain way. So there's tools in how to uncover sort of what the root problem is that you're trying to design. Ideate, of course, is important as well. And most of us are familiar with ideation as brainstorming, just generating tons of ideas. But in the design context, it's also about giving it visible form, expressing it in certain ways. So there's an issue of sort of how the brainstorming is done. So the visual part of it is critical, and as well as quantity. So there's research that shows that the more ideas that you generate, the more creative they're likely to be, because in the beginning you're throwing out all the ideas that are familiar, and then beyond that it starts to get to sort of unthought before ideas. Prototyping is also really key to the design process. It's about making things visible, giving them form. And again, in the design studio, we often hear, stop talking and start making, because you can get caught into your ideas of something, but it's only when you put it in physical form that you can dialogue with it and then move to a different place. And especially if you're stuck, but even otherwise, the evolution happens through making. And the prototyping doesn't need to be complicated. It's just, this is what would be called a low-resolution prototype. Take what you have around you and create it. And already you've given it presence, and then you can take the next step. Or here's an example of an early Fitbit, basically where you just put things together, test ideas, and then go to the future. So in the work that we've done at the College of Design, there are some principles that we use in framing, sort of making sure that we're encouraging the project that we're working on to kind of address these. So one is embracing diversity in all its forms. So even the sort of systemic redesign process involves a lot of people. It's sort of whoever is a user in the system is invited to the table. And so when you're getting groups of people to come together, the more different they are from each other, the better it is. So that's what the first one means. The second is the idea of radical collaboration. So people who would be very unlikely to work together. And perhaps in the user experience world, it's more common. But for example, in San Francisco, they were trying to solve some problems around homelessness, and they bought the tech, sort of really tech experts and homeless providers that typically don't work together. And so to create solutions. The third is making things visible, which we talked about a little earlier, which is core to design, having empathy, which has been covered before. And then these points are the first one, having creative confidence. This is really a critical one. It feels like that somewhere along grade school, we've told ourselves that we're either creative or not. And we sort of go our separate ways or something like that. And there's a lot of baggage around sort of what creativity is, and am I creative, or I'm creative in a very particular way. And my sense is that design thinking, the underlying premise of this is that if you're human, you're creative. That's it. So you can get on with then actually applying that creativity wherever you choose to. And that's part of what has excited me about this, because it's also allowing people to remember that their creative capacities and use them in the context of it. And we've had really people kind of recognize it sometimes in these workshops that, I'm very creative in this area of my life, but somehow I don't bring it to my work life. That feels sort of routine and so on. So connecting the dots on that creativity. Having a bias for action, this is really critical and it's very important in design. And especially in an academic context, I think we're really good, I think it was Tom Fisher who said that we're really good at admiring the problem, you know. That becomes like the end in itself. We can spend hours of empathizing with the problem. But then it's time to actually propose something and try it out and then kind of keep moving forward. And then that brings up the question of failure, because failing is part of it. With a design thinking mindset, it's not about if you will fail, it is when. So fail soon, fail forward, you know, those are the kinds of notions we take into consideration, and then committing to iterative action. So from there, I'm just going to go quickly through examples, and then we'll just have a discussion next. But I think the main thing is about focus on users. So I'm just showing a few examples of things we tried within design thinking at College of Design. And so one of the projects was about homelessness. So again, this was the city of Minneapolis and Hennepin County wanting to try to solve the problem. There's so many shelters on the right side we created. This is about making it visible. There isn't really a map you can pick up somewhere in the city that says that if you're homeless, where would you go? It's a very complex system. It's all focused in sort of downtown Minneapolis area, in sort of government buildings or churches and so on, but very hard to navigate. And so we talked to a staff person, and he said it took him 7 years to figure it out. So imagine, what the average person facing homelessness would do. And people talked about sort of people getting calls, staff getting calls about just because their name showed up on the website, because there isn't a one-stop shop or one place where you can go. So those were some of the things we were uncovering. The sketch in the middle was done by a staff person, sort of feeling like they were helpless. She's a nurse and she's trying to take notes about it, but she can't actually help the person. All she can do is sort of take notes about things. So, this kind of the systemic kind of silos and sort of how do you break through those to take action came through. We did some work with homeless guests, shelter guests themselves, and it was really powerful because they drew pictures, which I don't have here, of how the shelter feels like a jail. One woman drew herself looking out of a jail window and how it felt to her. We also uncovered that people who are homeless happen to be homeless, and that's how they are described. People experiencing homelessness, and essentially they are people with talents and capacities and so on. But do we see that, or is it sort of that they are receiving this benefit, and so they're typecast as a certain kind of individual? So those kinds of things came up, and we tried to work through that to arrive at some solutions. So this is in the higher ed context. We are a partnership with the Center for Higher Ed Innovation, the Janrus Center in CHD, and this was about finding higher ed possibilities. I'll keep moving through this. That work then later informed some consulting done for the University of Nebraska in Lincoln. And again, here, groups of people, we had about faculty from 136 departments come together to kind of envision what they would like to see for the Johnny Carson School of Theater and Film, so to make an interdisciplinary degree and kind of collaboration across the campus. But the breakthrough here was that the planning team, which is something, of course, that's very important. If you're going to use design thinking to make systemic change, you need a core team that's really committed to see this work going through. And so the team had not considered actually using students as part of the process, which was kind of really obviously not focused on what they needed to do. So it was focused on faculty. So we encouraged them to make students part of it. And that became the breakthrough for them, not only inviting the students, but what they heard. It was extremely powerful, and this is again the focus on the users. What experiences are the students having, and these experiences they shared then came and actually surprised and started to inform what the next agenda was for the college. This is some work in Iceland, and again, here you'll see it's what you notice is that sort of design thinking applied in different contexts takes completely different forms. And here, the skill set was the Icelanders are very hands-on. They knit, the students knit in the classrooms, and it's like a very arts-based in many ways. So you'll see in their prototypes, little Icelandic Nordic figures showing up and so on. So it's also a way of people to express their culture and their beliefs and so on. And that's something that would be interesting to explore further. How can design thinking give voice to these different cultures? This was some work about innovation at the university. And again, using large groups of people in small teams, using techniques like collaging and so on to give expression to this work. And this is work, of course, that Nick Rosenkrantz was part of here, and perhaps some of you in the audience were also. This is for the University of Minnesota portal. Early on, there were about 7 workshops held across the campuses, including the systems campus, Morris and Rochester and so on, where we had teams working on developing prototypes of what might happen, and then also a way for weighting it by using the Kano analysis model and sort of having people rate things about, things that are basic design that needs to be kept, that we embodied with like a shield symbol, a shield sticker, and then design strategies that are great with a smiley figure. And then we also used a technique of, what do we take out of there? So we used a sticker as an eraser, that sort of get this out of there. And we discovered that in the Minnesota NICE context, nobody wants to use their erasers, So we had to require them. You have to at least use 2 erasers before you can move forward. So this was good. But as I was talking to David and Nick, I think with this process, initially the vision was to take design thinking all the way through so that we'd have participatory workshops where, sort of the university community gave input, but then the design coders would take that and apply it to the design. But then there would be critiques, again, with participants sort of coming back to give critiques to what was evolved, and then that would continue. But I think, unfortunately, that process didn't quite unfold in that way. So certainly all the material that came out of here was used by the design coders, but the kind of the long-term application of design thinking didn't go through because of various reasons. So that's something. This is the Office for Public Engagement. Here, it has many issue area networks, about 9 of them, and what we did was work with them to create opportunities for each issue area network to envision what they might do. Then there was a grants process where there was some money, about $10,000 per topic, that was put on the table for grants for networks that would apply for it after the design thinking process. And it had some amount of success. I think about 4 or 5 of the 9 teams went forward and applied and to that process, took the work that came out of this forward. And they're actually reporting this month on the sort of the results of the outcomes from it. So that's another example where you can catalyze some work like that. And also equity and diversity, of course, this is before I joined the Office for Equity and Diversity, but this was a workshop with the College of Education. And again, here their sort of diversity process had stalled for various reasons, and this was sort of catalyzed the thinking and sort of uncovered about 6 kinds of key ideas that they could work on. I think the rest, this is about informatics and how data can be used. We have the University of Minnesota Informatics Institute. And then this goes back to my sort of sustainable design work where communities can come together and start to identify what they want to create. The second picture there is about a renewable energy farm of sorts that a small town in Minnesota in actually not quite so small, this was in Bemidji, sort of uncovers. But another image in the third image is about a very small town in North Dakota, Napoleon, North Dakota, uncovering sort of what's at the core of their food systems issues, where they have this inspector that they have sort of shown on the right that, is their source of frustration because he's very rule-based, and then the small organizations can't kind of get sort of to meet his requirements and so on. So just things that actually wouldn't come up with in a discussion about what the issues are came up just through the drawing exercise and so on, and then we could kind of build on it. So with that, I think I'm going to conclude by saying that design thinking can be used to frame a long-term process, to bring diverse users together, and then to tap the user creativity in solving the problems. Because oftentimes, design decisions are made by a few for the many, and the more you can actually include people in the design process of the future, the better it is from their perspective as well. And I think it's definitely these processes are fundamental to creating a community committed to innovation. So it's definitely should be part of the toolkit of things that you can draw on at will. So with that, I'm going to stop here. And maybe questions.
Are there any questions for Virajita? And Casey. Casey's right there. Thanks, Casey.
I guess this question is for Virajita. I also teach design, and I was just curious of a question regarding what are techniques or group activities or things that you do in the classroom that help engage design thinking, whether it's daily or checking in or throughout the semester in different classes, things that stand out, like maybe 5.
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually just gave a talk about just my design thinking teaching, and that's really one of the favorite things that for me to do. I love teaching, and so the class I typically teach is taught through the College of Continuing Education, so it has multidisciplinary students. It's in the Masters of Liberal Studies program. So that's actually wonderful because I talked about sort of diversity in all its forms, and when you get students from diverse disciplines, it's really exciting. So, that's one thing, sort of structuring your teams in a way that you're bringing diverse talents to one thing. The way I have structured my courses, I sort of scaffold the design exercises, and many of these students have not necessarily taken design courses, so we kind of come back to perhaps more academic writing kinds of things, but what I actually have them do is write about a designer. So I have them pick designers that they might be interested in, and so they have to do some research, pick 2 or 3, and then narrow the focus into one designer. But then I have them write not in an academic paper style, but I have them write in the genre of a magazine article, and they have to actually design that magazine article. So they have to learn how to format it, how to add pictures, how to make it visual, and so on. So that's my way of kind of bringing design principles into the act of writing and thinking about the designer, learning about the designer. So that's about another designer, because one of the things in design is about learning from other designers. All of us learn from models, and for designers as well, that's important. So that's one. The second exercise is on sort of thinking about themselves as designers. So I have them write another kind of article, but it is about themselves as though they have been interviewed by somebody to write that article, and it's 5 years into the future, so themselves as a designer. And that's, again, really hard, and again, I think it has to do with the modesty of this region, where nobody's willing to sort of put themselves out there as successful and, whatever it might be. So that's the second, and then the third thing, we jump into a real project. So I get real clients. We worked with the Minneapolis Institute of Arts before their big Italian fashion exhibit, and the students actually used the whole step-by-step design thinking process to brainstorm ideas for the exhibit, and MIA actually used those ideas. So I really believe in real project-based learning, and so that sort of really takes them then into application, and also understanding nuances with clients and, what user context and all of that. Does that help? Oh, one last thing. I require them to maintain a visual journal because I really think creativity and creative practice has to be fostered. And so the journal, which I practice myself as well, I don't go anywhere without my journal. So they're required throughout the semester to sort of keep that, put their readings, their brainstorming, anything related to the course or beyond into that journal. So in 15 weeks, I hope they have formed a habit of maintaining a journal. Sorry. Okay, you can just shout out your questions, I guess.
Red light means dead. Okay. Any other questions? I don't think I can walk around with anything. Unless I take the clip mic, which I might.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, if you've got the clip mic, I can run around with that thing. Right.
Yep.
Hey.
Design thinking.
There's a question.
Yeah, hold it for you? Sure.
Okay, sure. Actually, I'll hold it.
Okay.
So I couldn't help but notice that when Casey put up the slide of the team of people that he's supported by, it was a team of people who looked a lot like him, and I didn't see any women represented in that group. And then in the second presentation, when we talked about diversity in all its many forms, I'd just like both of you to comment briefly on the idea of gender diversity as it relates to design thinking.
Thank you. Great. Casey, you start and take that. Yeah, you can use this one.
That's a great observation you made there. We actually do have quite a few female designers on our team. I've never noticed gender bias actually in any of the design meetings that I've been in. We were built as a development shop, and I'd say while we do have females on our leadership committee, where 1/3 of our executive team is female. We also have other females in director positions. I think there's far fewer females in development on the execution side than there are on the design side. Did you want to chime in on that?
A microphone would be good. The thing that you don't know, and that I do know because I work with Casey, is that also most of the people in that picture were not in design. That was mainly developers.
Oh, that's true. That's true.
So it's like, okay, this is not the UX team.
No.
And I was too hung up on that to realize the fact that, oh yeah, not only is that true, but we don't have any women there either. But that was a good catch.
No, that slide was actually pulled from a team slide, not the actual representation for the actual design group. So, did you want to add a comment to that?
Yeah, I think it's really important to have a diverse team, but I think your observation is reminding me that especially when I work in smaller Minnesota communities, it's almost like the diversity is at the fringes. They're not in the mainstream conversation. So you have to take extra effort to actually go reach them, and then also make people aware, the planning team that I talked about, who we're working with, that, can we reach out? Who's not at the table? Who needs to be at the table? So I think my sense is that, which didn't come through perhaps so well, is that there's a lot that goes into planning to make a design thinking process really successful. And it's about sort of the deep conversations with the planning team and what the vision is, and also making sure that we're supporting them to reach their best future. So I think that's where a lot of that work comes in. And then certainly when the design thinking process is underway, having diversity there helps. So every step of the way there's value, and I've actually started to see more and more of that as I'm working in the Office for Equity and Diversity, and sort of realizing how many people are excluded, just not even intentionally, but just because we're not thinking as deeply about it. So thank you for your question.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Casey and Virajita. And we're going to have a break now for 15 minutes. I've got a gift for you. Don't run. Don't run away.